Okay, Maddie, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining in on this today. Today we're just going to be discussing the differences on the things that we were taught about gender within the Mormon Church. And we're going to be having 5 topics today. How being taught sexism affected women, how being taught sexism affected men, how to deconstruct it, how to spot it, and how we can learn from it. And so we're going to be having 2 people do each of those topics. Since we lost a couple people, we're going to have a few people do multiple. So whoever is up for that, that's all for you. And each topic is going to be about 10 minutes long, and then 5 minutes of open discussion where everyone can talk about it afterwards. And then at the very end, we're going to have a 45-minute Q&A. All right. So who would like to start us off with our first topic?
Hey, Maddie, I have a quick suggestion, maybe might be beneficial, like where everybody kind of grew up in the church. Like if you grew up Utah, Idaho, or like wherever, maybe that is beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Who would like to start off with our first topic, which is how to spot sexism within the church and how to spot it still in the ex-Mormon community? I can go first for that topic if anyone wants to join with me.
I can join in afterwards.
Okay. All right. Okay. So. What I've learned about how to spot it within the religion when I was at church, and how to still spot it today, is you have to look very closely at behavior, because sometimes people don't automatically show it. We're not going to be talking about Mike, but him as an example. Recently, the sexism that he's been showing, we didn't spot it at first. But then when it came out more into the open, we saw it. Hi, Derek.
Hi, good to see you guys.
Hi, good to see you. You can join in on one of the next topics. Right now we're discussing how to spot sexism in the church and how to still spot it in the ex-Mormon community.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Anyway, with Mike, it was really hard to spot at first. And so a good way to look at that is to not ignore the red flags, because there are little red flags here and there. And I feel like that's why we didn't spot it at first with him, and why we didn't spot it a lot in the church when we were in the church, because we have been taught to ignore the red flags. So the first step is to, one, learn how to spot the red flags and how to not push them to the side, because that's a very instinctual thing that we do, at least I do, as former members of the Mormon Church. Do you have anything to add to that, Chloe?
Yeah, I think that one of the red flags that I was thinking of as you were talking about is when you are talking to someone who is in a place of privilege, since we're talking about gender, specifically men or cis white men, when you are correcting them on their behavior, it's very important to look at what their response is.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you can tell when someone feels entitled because their response is going to be defensive, or to assume that they already know more about the topic than you do. And that was kind of something that I had to deconstruct very much, not only like leaving the church, but also recognizing that I wasn't a man and transitioning and realizing that I was stepping down from this huge place of privilege. And all of a sudden realizing like all of these things that I was afforded as a man that I didn't even realize were privileges before. And I think it's important to recognize that in the church, men are kind of told that they are the leaders of this religion that has all of the truth, and that they are the leaders of that church. And so there's like a level of privilege, even on top of the already cis white male privilege that you have as being part of America, there's this entitlement. That's the word I'm thinking for. And I think when you know that you're looking for someone who feels and acts entitled, that's definitely a good sign that they maybe haven't deconstructed the attitude that they were taught in the church.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that another red flag is it goes along with that for sure. The way that they choose to, it's also the way that they choose to respond, but like the way that they choose to like physically respond, like how there are a lot of like not straight on threats that they'll push out there, but they're kind of the same kind of thing. It's just little things, like little not quite threats, but just like, hey, if you don't do this, this might happen, you know? And that's what the church is all about. They're about threatening to keep you silent and to keep you in the church. And that's what they teach men to do. Does anyone else have anything else to add to that, like for the open discussion?
I think like a big thing, especially like once leaving the church and like within the ex-Mormon community, is figuring out a lot of men leave for a lot of different reasons compared to women. And like, yes, that's a stereotype, that's a umbrella kind of thing, but a lot of the men, especially white cis het men, tend to leave because of specifically just the doctrine, but then they don't deconstruct anything else. They're like, well, because they're still privileged within America. Like white men are the top tier of everything in the United States. And a lot of them just take the same teachings the church gave them about being above everyone else because they were priesthood holders. And they still take that with them and don't bother to try and deconstruct what they've been taught. And I think like mentioning the entitlement is a good thing, but also kind of seeing their behaviors and their interactions, especially with both women ex-Mormons and women Mormons. It's very telling of how they actually think. Maybe attacking women more than men, or not like invalidating what women have to say about their experiences. Those are all signs that, you know, probably most people aren't doing that on purpose. Most people aren't sexist on purpose, but that's a sign of the misogyny that they've taken with them from the church, from the LDS church, excuse me.
Yeah, if I could cut in, while we're talking about red flags and mentioning red flags, and Julia, like you said, most of these men, they deconstruct, but then only to a point. And there is, I think, years worth of deconstructing that can be done as soon as you leave that organization. And first off, not everyone has a desire for deeper depths or more profound self-awareness. And so I think raising awareness around that issue is potentially something that can help in the deconstruction process, like teaching mindfulness and awareness. Yeah, sorry, I'm like nervous and getting jumbly in my head right now. I actually take notes so that I don't get all tongue-tied and everything, but that's not working for me right now. But anyway, speaking to the red flags specifically, I started to notice red flags even in myself and in my own behavior. And then I had good friends that were still willing to be my friend while pointing out these red flags. A few of them being, I was less willing to listen to women, or things that would be said by a woman weren't necessarily valid yet until a man backed it up. And it was a big piece of humble pie that I had to take when I was being called out for that behavior. And there's like an ego inside, especially men that leave the church. There's this little ego inside of us, this ugly little ego that we are trying to protect. It's fragile, and it turns us into like monsters with teeth, with sharp, pointy fangs. And anyway, I had to resist every reaction that was swelling up inside of me, to protect that ego and give myself to greater amounts of awareness, self-awareness. And it was a tough pill to swallow to find that I had sexist behavior, misogynist behavior. But a phrase that I really like, as cliche as it may sound, you have to be able to name those demons before you can tame them.
Yeah, I think that was perfectly stated, Truth Center. And so we had Mindy in the comments suggesting microaggressions, like labeling the microaggressions that Maddie was talking about. And I think that that's incredibly important. Growing up in the Mormon church, we really didn't have a social justice, progressive minded vernacular, let alone anything else. So I think that for a lot of people, the idea of microaggressions is laughable. I know it actually is for me, or has been, like, oh, please, but it's a thing. It's true. And one of the things that I think that men especially struggle with the most after leaving Mormonism is that now we kind of have this freedom to make jokes and to mock others, mock ourselves, and say bad things, use bad words, use bad humor. And so we run with it, and it becomes sexist, it becomes racist, and then we are really upset when we're called on that, because we just left this religion that had such strict confines over what we could say and do and think. And now we come out and we think it's a free for all, but we step in it. And then we start feeling that fear again, those walls closing in on us of, I can't say this now. I'm not allowed to do this now. And I think that that's both valid, because it sort of is a triggering experience, but and it's okay for us to acknowledge that and to say, okay, that's valid, but also to back up and be like, all right, just because this religion was incredibly abusive in the way that they closed us in doesn't mean that everything is a free for all, and that actually having things that we don't say, don't do, is inherently wrong, because it takes something to be a good person, and it takes giving up things to be a good person. We were taught that it took that to get to the celestial kingdom, to become as gods, to whatever, but it's still true. It's just we have more wiggle room, but we can't just do whatever we want.
That's a very good point. I really like that. Okay, who would like to move on to our next topic, which is how being taught sexism affected women? Okay, go ahead, Julia.
I think as a woman from this perspective, I don't really know I don't know exactly what men were taught, because guess what? I didn't get to sit in on those meetings. But within the church, you have that separation. And I think women are taught more that it's our responsibility to control men's thoughts. Like, oh my gosh, I'm showing my shoulders, or my legs, or my skirt's a little too short. Like that's on me. And a lot of the modesty language is revolved around women. Because let's be honest, men, how hard is it for you to cover your shoulders and wear a pant, wear an appropriate length bottoms? It's a lot easier for men. I remember growing up having to wear men's basketball shorts because that was the only shorts that were appropriate. And getting my mom getting talked to because I would show up to like Mutual in what I would wear to cheerleading, which was the Sophie shorts and a t-shirt, totally appropriate for a 12, 13, 14-year-old. But my mom would get pulled aside and be like, well, your daughter shouldn't be wearing that to Mutual. And thankfully, my mom is an amazing woman and just said, you're stupid. And was like, well, it's either that or she doesn't come. What do you want? But, and then you also kind of have this, we're taught like that, you know, our sexuality is a problem and it's our problem, right? It's our problem if men find us attractive. It's my problem if I'm assaulted. That's on me. And so a lot is put on women. And then you also have like my divine nature is to be a wife and mother. Like that, my whole purpose is to get married, have kids, be at home, take care of kids, and be exhausted my entire life, I guess. I don't know. I don't have kids, so I can't speak to that. But, and I remember just as somebody who can't physically have children, and I found out at a relatively young age that I have pretty severe endometriosis, feeling less than because of that, or less than because when I was older, I have a career. I've been in my career for 13 years now, and I wasn't willing to give up that career for a man. But then any man I dated in a young single adult ward was like, well, I don't want you to do that. I'm like, well, screw you. Because again, I was raised by a strong woman, thankfully. But there's all of this. I think a lot of it is put on women that shouldn't be put on women, because that's not our fault. Like, your thoughts are not my fault. Your feelings are not my fault. You doing something is not my fault. But also this thing that like this expectation that I needed to get married at 18, have kids, have lots of kids. My parents only had 3 of us, and that's weird. My mom also worked outside of the home, and she was looked down, and I saw that she was looked down upon because she worked outside of the home. But and I was looked down upon because I had a career, and that because I went to college, and because I got a degree, and because I wanted to better my life outside of if I ever got married. And guess what? Like, now I'm 30, I'm making an income that most of my friends who got married at 18 would have never had a chance to make, because I was able to do all this schooling and I was able to work through all of that, where they were getting married in college, didn't finish their degree. Sometimes the husband didn't finish the degree because he had to get a job to support the fact that they had kids at 18. Whereas like now I'm so much more stable because I ignored that. Just to be honest, I ignored it because I'm an unruly child, I guess. Thanks for laughing. I can't hear you laughing, but yeah, so like you end up with all of this as a woman being taught that you are actively being taught that you're less than a man. You are less than like my brothers because I can't hold the priesthood. I am less than because I am a woman, and none of this is my fault. So I think I got everything out that I wanted to. I word vomited a bit, but.
Can I jump in? Is that okay? Okay, perfect. Julie, I love what you're saying here. And I also don't want to scrape by the fact that what she's saying is absolutely true. Like, any active member can look at this and say, oh, I don't really think we directly say that women are less than, but we need to keep in account some major things that are taught over the pulpit. So in the huge interview that the first presidency had when President Nelson was just called to be prophet, one of the interviewees or the journalists was a woman. And she said, what are you going to do as a new prophet in the church to address women and equal rights and stuff like that? I could be butchering the quote, but I'm going to try and get the general sense of it. He, first of all, would like beat around the bush and said, you know, oh, I know your parents and you're a good journalist, blah, blah, blah. But when directly asked again, he's saying, women glorify God by bearing children. So hearing Julia say, you know, I have medical issues that prevent me from bearing children, even in that, for an active Mormon woman, is enough to feel shame just from President Nelson's comment, just from his comment saying, you glorify God by bearing children. And then we have Julia here who's just like, well, I can't. So what now? Right? So these things are taught over the pulpit. We also have Oak saying, oh wait, I forget what I was going to go with that. Just had a brain fart. But another thing that I might want to just discuss here real quick is Tawny and the Ex-Mormon community just did a quick series on TikTok about this, how even in families there's sexism. So she served a mission, but most of the support from the parents, money-wise and going out and hanging out with friends and stuff like that, most of the support was put on the sons, the men in the family with the priesthood. So their missions were supported. They weren't interrogated about, you know, are you worthy, are you not worthy? But she was extremely interrogated. She also had to work a lot more to get out into the mission field and stuff like that. So even within the family unit, there's oversight with sexism too as well. I feel like I felt that too in my family too as well, because I have 3 sisters, and my parents were always just like, you just get married, right? Like just get married. Even go to university. You don't have to do a major career. Just do something, and then you'll find a man. But with me, it's like they came to me and they're like, if you go on a mission, you will be supported. You're fine. So, and why wouldn't it have been the same for my sisters? Is because they wanted me to be the missionary, right? So, anyway, that's the end of my thoughts. Thank you.
Can I just kind of piggyback on that, like talking about sexism in the family? I've realized I've never been super ingrained in the ex-Mormon community. I don't know why I went to go put quotes. I've never been super ingrained in the ex-Mormon community, and I didn't grow up in the bubble. So like Utah, Idaho, Arizona, parts of Nevada. Didn't grow up there. I grew up outside of that. Both my parents did. So that might have something to do with it. And in my family, that sexism, and I'm not like saying that it's not there for others. I'm pointing out that I'm seeing it for the first time because I thought about going on a mission. And this was when you had to be 21 to go on a mission. I'm a little bit older, guys, you know, not brand new. I thought about going on a mission, and it was going to take a lot of work for me because I was in the Army. And so they have a program where you can still do that. And my parents sat me down and they're like, okay, like we'll support you. We'll pay for you. All of that. If this is what you want to do, know that you don't have to. And they never pushed either of my brothers to go on missions, but they had money set aside for all of us to go on a mission. And the only person within the church that I've never felt pressure from to get married is my own mother. Anytime I've gone back home, even when I was still active, you know, all of the ladies in Relief Society who've known me since I was like 6, like, oh, are you dating? Oh, are you getting married? And my mom's like, she's 20. She's fine. And I did bring it up once to my mom, and I was like, yeah, I feel this pressure to get married. And she was like, yeah, I did too. Like my father gave me, this is my mom, because my mom grew up in a very, very sexist family, like very much so. And she didn't like it. So I think that like transferred to us, that she hated that. I think she was 26 when she got married to my father. And she went on a mission. My grandfather gave her wedding present because they didn't think she was going to get married because she was too old. So like, I do know that it happens, and I'm very grateful now that like my family, because of my mom, like my mom wasn't able to get drive a car until she was 18. It was very much expected that my mom was going to take care of the family. My mom didn't go to college because she wasn't allowed to go to college. And thankfully, she hated it and was like, I'm not doing that to my daughter. So hearing other people say like what their family is like, kind of just makes me really grateful that, and I don't know if it's because I grew up outside of the bubble, if I grew up in a very small LDS area, or if my parents are just weird in a good way. But so that's not to like disagree with anybody who's felt that. It's just, I think seeing that has changed my perspective on sexism within families, if that makes sense. I don't know if any of that made sense, but.
Yeah.
Go
sorry.
ahead, Maggie.
Okay. Yeah, no, it made sense, Julia. And I think that that's a big thing, because we all had different families. We all had different, whatever. But the doctrine was incredibly clear. And I know that when I would go to church, I would not by any stretch of the imagination call my mother a feminist. She was the type where a man speaks and that's it. I mean, I still actually have trouble with that when she's in our life, and in my marriage, where she will not listen to me. My husband says one thing, and it's okay, like, all right. But I definitely didn't have a lot of oversight in my life with regards to stuff like that. My grandfather was a different story. He was way more old school, etc. Point being that in the area I grew up with, I think that there was a mixed bag, none of which I would actually say was particularly feminist or particularly left or woke or whatever. I think that the most like women focused or whatever, like anti-sexism we got was, I knew one or two women who worked outside the home or who had their own business. And I mean, real business, not like multi-market thing. And they got flack, but it was a lot more of oh, how sad for them that they have to work outside the home. Like, how sad for them that they can't just be, what God intended and stay home with their children. And so I grew up in Southern California, and you would think that I would have more of the hardcore, like pro women, feminist, whatever. No, I didn't. And one of the women that I did know in my life, she got married, I think at like 25 or something. She didn't want to get married, but she did. And that was like a huge thing. Like, oh, we'd say, oh, she's a feminist. Like, oh, she waited that long to get married. And I remember once she showed me that she put her mother's maiden name on her invitations to her wedding, obviously not the wedding, but you know what I'm saying. And how she did that because she said to me, her mother was a human too. Cause usually it's just Mr. and Mrs. Smith instead of, her mother's actual full name. So I remember that stuck with me because it was things that I had never thought on before. And there were definitely things when I was growing up that bothered me about how gender and sex and all that stuff was talked about in the church. I remember being outraged that the boys, the young men, got to go on these like expensive and extravagant trips. I remember once they got to go scuba diving in Catalina. What we were doing that week was learning how to cook chicken and potatoes. And we had to bring the chicken and potatoes because the young women didn't have the budget to buy it. And I remember just being like outraged by this and getting in trouble for being outraged by it. And I remember, and that's another thing with us women is we're taught that we're so emotional, we're overreacting about everything. So I saw this idea that like, well, I guess I'm overreacting, even though I was like this uppity teenager who on the one end was like raging in the hallway. On the other hand, I was like, oh, why don't I just shut up? Like, why am I like this? But this is something that repeatedly happened repeatedly, like constantly happen all the time with the young men. They would come into the church building, get some stuff, and then go out to do something like super cool. And we were over here trying to figure out what we were going to do with our limited budget and within the confines of being a woman and all of these things. I know for me, I always wanted to be a mom. I wanted a lot of kids. I wanted to stay home. I wanted to homeschool. These were all things that I wanted to do. And yes, I question whether or not I wanted to do them based on the fact that I was raised Mormon. I question this all the time. There's a lot of things that I've let go of in Mormonism, especially culturally. I never really fit in for probably obvious reasons. But this is something I always wanted. And I love that I had kids young. I love that I was a stay-at-home mom. I love that I homeschooled. I love that I got married young. And I wouldn't do it a different way. But there still was these expectations on me that even though I did all of those things right, I didn't do them right enough. and that was something that kind of drove me a little crazy. So, I mean, I had my kids very young. Neither one of us went to school. And I remember getting talking tos and finger wags about I shouldn't be doing this with my kids. I shouldn't be doing this with my womb. I shouldn't be doing this. And I was the only one getting these conversations. My husband wasn't. If he's the leader, then why does the buck stop with me? Why is it my fault for the house being the mess or the kids being too loud or you're having too many kids too close together was one big thing, or you're not making enough money for this many kids? First of all, how is that any of your damn business? Second of all, why are you coming to me about this? Why am I being pulled aside about this? Why isn't my husband? And so I noticed pretty early on in my marriage when I returned to the church that men were there to be congratulated, were there to be bolstered, were there to have their ego stroked, where women, there was very few times that they found something worthy of complimenting or saying, you know, hey, you go, Sister Maggie. Like, it was always, I was in trouble for something. I mean, I remember one time in particular, I was getting reamed. My husband walks up and they turn around and started praising him. So it's like this is interesting, like, and that's not to say that I understand that there are definite sexist things that happen with men. There's a lot of problems that are put on men that shouldn't be put on men. But when it comes to men and women standing together, especially in marriage, because that's men and women standing together, then the man is always the preferred. He's always right. He's always doing the best thing. And it's always the women who need to step up their game.
I have a little bit that I want to add on to that. I have kind of the unique perspective of I was raised in the church as a man before I transitioned, and I spent most of my 20s grappling with the idea that I wasn't actually a man, that I had spent my whole life wanting to be a woman, and so I had to deal with these insane double standard of gender norms. And something that I understood fairly early on is that much of what makes up a woman in Mormon culture and doctrine is their relationship to men and their attraction to men. And the fact that I didn't have attraction to men made even conceptualizing the idea that I was trans very difficult. Because in my mind, a woman was someone who was a mother and who had kids and who married a man. And because I didn't have the words for what being a trans woman meant, I felt like, well, I can't be a woman because a woman is someone who is able to have kids, and I don't want to be with a man. And like, I could not fit into any of the roles that Mormonism wanted me to fit into, even if I had transitioned, because I wasn't attracted to men. And these gender norms just get stricter and stricter the more you looked at them. And there's, like Maggie was talking about, there's such a huge divide between the expectations and the power that each one holds. I remember thinking immediately after I had realized that I was trans, it was kind of this big aha moment, and I was kind of going through what that meant for my membership in the church. And I thought about, okay, if I go back to the church as a woman. What does that mean? That means I'm going to lose the priesthood. I'm going to lose my ability to be in any leadership roles for the rest of my life. I'm going to lose the ability to like be the leader in my own home. Just all sorts of things I started realizing immediately, like watching all of these privilege just one after another leaving. And it was a very humbling moment on top of an already very stressful moment, recognizing like all of the sexism that existed and all of the lack of privilege that I was now going to have if I was ever to go back. And it's another hallmark of the sexism in the church that it took me realizing I was a woman to realize realize the double standard that existed between them.
Yes, I completely agree with all that everybody has said on this. I would like to add one more thing. The biggest problem with sexism in the church, like growing up as a woman, to me at least, was how invalidating and how much it affected your self-esteem, at least for me, because I was always taught, men are like the top dogs, they're always going to be better. They're always going to have better formed opinions. They're going to be smarter. They're going to know what they're talking about more than you will. And that always really affected my self-esteem, and it made me quiet and keep my own opinions to myself. And after leaving the church, it's been very hard to kind of come out of that shell and open myself up more. And the thing that's really actually helped me is the Ex-Mormon TikTok community, because I have figured out that my opinion is worth something. And I have figured out how to rebuild my own self-esteem and try to get to a better point for myself because of the way that I was taught about what my gender made me. And I've had to realize that my gender and the things that I've grown up with aren't what they are, or they aren't what I've been taught. And it's like different. If anybody has anything else to add, go ahead. If not, we'll move on to the next topic. Okay, the next topic is how sexism has affected men. So who would like to start off with that?
I can kick up. Oh, you want?
Go for it, Kirk. You go.
Cool. So no, this one has always been like, and just to kind of actually chime off of Anthony and Derek, as they had both said, of just, we don't, as a man that was raised in the church, we don't recognize that what we're being taught is sexism. We're being told that what we're being taught is the word of God, which is so much worse. Like it's so much worse. We're being told that, like, it's Gaston-esque. It's, one day you will have stewardship over this individual and it will be your responsibility to love and care and protect and all these wonderful things. And these are the words of God. And these words, like these insidious and terrible, corrosive and toxic words, we are told that is how the world and the devil looks at them, but that we are strong pillars of community. We are strong, wonderful, stalwart children of God, and it is our responsibility. And then they start doing these other kind of microaggressions, if you will, where, I know we talked about it on TikTok months and months and months ago, of how I am an awkward guy. I'm still an awkward guy. I'm still weird. And I was terrified to go to dances because what if girls would say no to me and I would be humiliated? And I was told, oh no, it's okay. They're not allowed to say no. Like, that was put out. They're not allowed. They would print pamphlets like, just say yes. It's not that bad. And for the record, I'm weird. I wouldn't want to dance with me. And so, like, the fact is that the reason the hottest girls would dance with me is because they had to. That's not better. That's actually a remarkably dangerous lesson. And I saw it then, I went on my mission, and my first mission president was openly, non-subtly derisive towards sister missionaries. Like, it was a culture of, well, if they were you were only here if you weren't hot enough to get married. And if you were hot enough to get married, then why were you here at all? Or you were somehow lesser. And that is a corrosive mentality. And it gets into this thing that is replayed every week and every mutual and every general conference that no, you're not a sexist. No, you're not hating on women. You're actually, like that talk that got quoted earlier. It's no, it is a glory of God to be a woman as long as you're doing it at home with a baby. It is reimplanted over and over, but it's done such with such loving words and open arms and compassion that it takes that same realization that Chloe was talking about. It's that same realization that you realize, holy shit, am I an asshole? I'm an asshole. And that hits you really late. And you're like, I have like 100,000 phone calls to make. Like, hey, yo, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't know. I mean, I guess I should have. Everyone was screaming it at me, but I had been taught from infancy that they were just angry that I had the word of God. And that is so much worse than being a sexist. Like, that is being an ordained of God sexist. And that's so much worse. And so I see so many people now that like are still in the church, and I see them in the comment sections on YouTube videos or on TikToks, and they're coming at it and they're using these apologist tactics that I'm aware of, and I hear them and I see them and I'm like, that poor bastard doesn't realize that he's not only the problem, that he doesn't even realize he's also the victim of it, because he doesn't see what he's doing. And it's so tragic, because I really didn't know I was the asshole until all of a sudden, like Anthony was saying, suddenly I was like, oh shit, I'm the asshole. Damn it. I wish someone had pointed it out. Wait, no, everyone pointed it out. I wish I had heard it. And it's this really weird cycle that where men being taught the same sexism makes us absolutely the problem, but in so many cases, the absolutely unknowing problem and a victim of the same cycle that breaking free from is hard, because it's not sexism. It's word from on high. The prophet said it. And that's, I mean, that's kind of all I've got, but it's a dangerous place to be.
Okay, if I can cut in, thank you, Kirk. I love
Please.
the way you express yourself. It's really funny. I love that you're a weird dude.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to go at it from another angle that I'm not sure that everyone really considers. And this is something that I actually really deconstructed before leaving the faith, because it deeply affected me and deeply affected my family and how I developed and my relationship with my father. So I remember I'm a bit of a freak myself, in that I have really early memories, sharp early memories. And I do remember as a young kid, like when I was 4 or 5 years old, going to church and hearing rhetoric such that it really pushed the idea that men had to be the sole provider of the home. And furthermore, it was actually shaming, in that if a man wasn't the sole provider of the home, he obviously was lacking in faith, or he needed to work on himself, or he needed to have more faith, or do more, or try harder. And my own father was extremely subject to that type of shame. And he was an entrepreneur, a struggling entrepreneur, especially when my roommate just got home. Hey, dude, I'm on a panel. Yeah, thank you. So anyway, he was subjected to all of this shame and felt that he had to do more as somebody that was chasing after his dream as an entrepreneur. And so not only was he trying to get his business off of the ground, but then he also found work outside of that. This all translated to me not even having a relationship with my father. I didn't even know my dad for most of my life growing up, because it was pushed so heavily. He's the sole provider. He's not the one to provide nurture or he's not the nurturer of the home. That is our mom's job. He's the provider. And so my father, not only was he working on his business, but he was working in the oil field as a welder up in Alaska. I would go an entire month without seeing my dad. And then he would be in the home for a weekend or maybe a few days, and then gone for an entire month or months again. And so yeah, I didn't even get to know my dad. This is such harmful teaching, not just for people here in America, but this was stuff that a lot of it was pushed over general conference pulpit, which shocking. That shows such unawareness of socioeconomics in other countries where a single sole provider income just simply isn't possible in many other countries. And then pushing all of that shame on men, and even teaching men, if you aren't the sole provider of the home, you're not doing enough. You are not magnifying your calling. I remember that was an idea that I started to adopt as to what I was to become as a young child. And then, it's like they rely on just amnesia, widespread population amnesia, because suddenly it was like they realized, oh, this is harmful. I'm not sure if this was what they came to, but they realized this isn't what we're pushing isn't even possible, and it's not even possible in a lot of other places. And they just stopped talking about it. They didn't go to try and repair the damage that they had done. They simply just stopped talking about it.
Well, and I think actually it goes beyond just the being able to provide for a family or something like that. I think the thing is careers and jobs and all that kind of stuff brings, at least me, it brings happiness. And I can imagine, and I know I've talked to a lot of other people. It's the same thing. Their career, their business, growing their business, it brings joy, it brings happiness, it brings fulfillment in life and all these different things. And that's something that's almost seems like it's stripped away when we're talking about this, when we're talking about everything dealing with the women working and stuff like that outside the home and everything. Like those are things that get stripped away. And I look at my own mother or my own sisters who didn't work outside of the home, or when they did, they were shamed for it. And it caused a lot of issues. It made their lives kind of miserable. They went through bouts of anxiety and depression and all these things because they weren't getting the fulfillment that they wanted. And I saw the same thing with my ex-wife when she wasn't working and stuff like that. And it wasn't because I pushed her not to work or anything like that. I wanted her to be able to work. It was just she felt culturally she couldn't. And so that was something that kind of gets stripped away in there. And I feel is important to acknowledge that is another thing that it's important for everybody to be able to have access to, is being able to work so that they can feel the fulfillment if that's what they want, and get the joy that they want from those things that they're doing there.
If I could jump in just to tag back in on and all that. So to both of those points. So I, at one point a few years ago, I own a company now. So I work 30,000 jobs here. But at one point I had 5 actual jobs, 2 full-time, 2 part-time, and 1 freelance consulting, where it was kind of intermittent. I live in Northern Virginia, Washington, DC area, where everyone is dual income. But for that exact same reason, my wife stayed at home. We had several children. So she was stay at home. And one of my full-time jobs, I worked with a lot of very, very liberal women who actively and openly shamed me for making my wife stay at home. No one makes my wife do anything, but that's not how that dynamic was at all. But it was the exact same thing you said. She didn't feel like she was allowed to go out. So she was a stay-at-home mother because that was where she was supposed to be. We had talked about whether she wanted to get a job, and it was not something she felt comfortable. Meanwhile, the bishop didn't feel comfortable giving me a calling because sometimes I had to work Sundays, and that was a choice I was making, which made me not worthy to have a calling. So work hates me because I keep my woman down. Woman not allowed to go out because the church won't give me a calling because I'm a heathen. It's a really, really shitty position to be in.
Can I ask a question just real
Please.
quick to the men, or to the people who grew up as men within the church? Did you ever also feel shamed whenever you, if you had a hobby that maybe wasn't considered masculine, like, oh, I play the piano, or oh, I'm in band, or oh, I like dance? Can you kind of talk about that as well, maybe?
So I was huge into theater. I've watched exactly one sporting event in my life, and I'm 38. But ballet, I'm about it. And no, like even amongst my family, the fact that I went out and bought tap shoes, and my dad teased me for it. I did theater and dance and choir, and I got teased a lot for it. Not existing in a, being, for the record, very hetero, very cis, very everything, but really liking the fine arts, dramatic arts, performance arts. It again was that same thing of I got pulled and well, frankly, beat up a lot for it. I lived in some pretty. I didn't grow up in the Mormon bubble either. I grew up all over the country. I'm a military brat, and it seemed like everywhere we went, I was beat up for being gay a lot while not actually being gay. Yeah, it was a big problem growing up.
As someone who tried their entire life to hide any femininity in anything, I think a huge part of that was because of the church. Part of it was due to, I was going to say part of it was due to the toxic kind of beliefs and relationships in my own family, but thinking back generationally, it was caused because of the church. I have grandparents and things that had very old school patriarchal views on masculinity and femininity, men and women's roles, and that was kind of passed down along to me. And I remember from a very young age, anytime I would express femininity, wanting to like wear a dress or like dress in like a pink Power Ranger suit, they were supportive, but in that way that they're subtly making fun of you. They're like, oh, look how cute that he thinks he wants to be a girl and things like that. And I remember I was such a fragile little kid that I internalized all of that. And it took me, 20 years to undo all of the shame that came around being feminine and liking feminine things and untangling everything because of it.
For me, it was a little bit different there. It wasn't so much like that things I enjoyed that were more feminine got suppressed or stuff like that, though that did happen. It was more of around the expectation of things that were, masculine that I didn't enjoy, and feeling shamed around those things. That was a big thing for me was, oh, I am really not all that into camping, or I'm really not, I know that's not strictly a masculine thing, but like, doing the heavy lifting stuff and all that stuff, I'm really not all that into it. It's not fun. A lot of the sports things I'm not really all that into. And it felt like I couldn't connect with, I wasn't allowed, I was shamed for, made fun of, and all these different things for not being into all those things when everybody was supposed to be into those things if you were a man.
So this kind of goes into, I think, what we like accidentally into what we were talking about with men being the breadwinner. Because when Obi came in and talked about this, when they were like, women should have the ability to find that, sustenance outside of the home or whatever. I think it's actually the same for men. I think a lot of men end up going into a career that's lucrative because it's what they need to do in order to make the money to support a family. And so you have women who are home who maybe don't want to be home and they're upset. And you have men who are at work who don't want to be at this particular job and they're upset. And it just doesn't make for a great relationship or parenting experience. But on top of that, they're also pressured to appear to be happy, to appear to be content, to make sure that they have that shining spirit in their eyes. So it's yeah.
Those are all very, very good points. Does anybody else have anything else to say on this topic? Okay, so let's move on to how we can deconstruct these things that we were taught in the church. Who would like to go first for this?
I can start. The most important thing I've learned for me, because I've had to do a lot of deconstructing outside of outside of just church things, I also had to deconstruct my own gender and everything. I kind of did that all at the same time. So it was a huge flurry of things. And the biggest thing I learned was to listen to the people that are in the marginalized communities that are affected by whatever's happening. If you are learning about sexism, you need to learn from women and other marginalized genders. If you're learning about trans issues, learn from trans people. If you're learning about racism, talk to Black, Indigenous people of color, because they are the ones that are the most affected by it. If we sit in an echo chamber and only learn from people that haven't directly experienced the negative aspects of whatever part of society, then we're not actually going to truly understand what the issues are and how we can help and how to stop perpetuating.
Yeah, and to segue off of what Chloe said. So deconstructing, I'm still in the middle of my deconstruction process. Yippee. And my most viral video on TikTok so far was me coming out and admitting to both myself and the world, yeah, I had misogynistic tendencies that I was unaware of. So now all of the world knows that I was a misogynist. Yay. But anyway, a few things that I have actively sought to do to help in my deconstruction process. One, remove my ego. And then also acknowledge that biases exist everywhere. We're human, we all have different biases. Every single person on this earth has a bias that they can become aware of and start working on. And so for men specifically, because you tell a man that he's a misogynist, or you tell a man that he has sexist things that he does here and there, and I saw this just in the comments of that video that I was talking about, immediately they go on the defensive. I think that some of that may have stemmed from, when we first started this movement, this progressive movement in our society socially, to bring awareness to those things. And like when feminism really started taking off, a lot of men felt like they were being attacked. And this went on for years. And because they felt like they were being attacked, they took an almost like permanent or semi-permanent defensive posture against that movement, especially in the church. So one thing that I've done as I've approached other men in comments and also just where the subject has come up, I've made it very clear that, hey, it doesn't mean that you are a bad guy. It doesn't mean that you are a bad person. It means that you are human. We all have bias. And all I'm saying is that you can work on your bias. I'm doing it too. I am working on my bias. I'm working on when a woman speaks, really listening and hearing out their idea, their ideas. And then furthermore, if a woman talks and she's not being heard in the room and her ideas, or it's just being glossed over, calling attention that she's saying something important, and calling attention to the fact that she's trying to contribute to the dialogue, and giving credit where credit is due.
I think for me, I had the, opportunity to start my deconstruction process not before the internet, but I didn't have Reddit, I didn't have TikTok, I didn't have any of that. I did a lot of it on my own. And I am in a society with my job that is also pretty sexist. And I was, Truth Spinner's laughing because he knows, but is actively trying to change and push forward. And so for me, so you talking about the sexism thing, because I do think women have to also overcome this internalized sexism. We're not immune from being sexist to women just because we're women. And we're not immune to looking down on ourselves because we're women, just because we're women. We all have that. We were all taught the same things. But I had the opportunity to not do it publicly, I guess. And I think that was actually really helpful, because I got to go through my angry stage in private versus in public. And I was able to kind of, be an angry bitch in the comfort of my own house and do all of that, that angry learning and that angry digging alone. And for me, I think that was beneficial, because now I can, and am I still like, have I deconstructed everything? No. My initial reaction when I see somebody like at work wearing a certain outfit is like, oh, I don't know that that's work appropriate. And then I'm like, oh no, that's me going, she's wearing a tank top, and saying that that's not a work appropriate because it's not modest. But I don't say the quiet thing out loud anymore, which is progress. So I was able to kind of do that without, I hate to say, like, without being embarrassed, so to speak, on the internet, without having to be called out on the internet. And so now my approach now with somebody like, say, True Spinner or Derek or Kirk, is to like be kind when I'm pointing it out. Because I think I have made a couple videos, and sometimes being kind doesn't work. Like, just being honest, but I've made videos where I was like, hey, ex-Mormon men, you are dismissing women. This was like months and months ago, probably close to 6 or 7. It was like, hey, a lot of you guys are only critiquing women ex-Mormons for the same information that men are saying. And yes, both of them are incorrect, but you can't just call out women. And I got and people apologize, because that works, for at least when I deliver it that way. I know other people are different, and some people don't receive it. And then sometimes I tell people that they're just fucking stupid. It just depends on the situation. But deconstructing, I've been out of the LDS Church for a long time, and I still have those internal biases and those that church voice in the back of my head that goes, oh, well, that's not appropriate, or oh, that, but and it's acknowledge, for me, it's okay, I acknowledge what that is, where it came from, okay, why I think that's inappropriate. Okay, it's because she's wearing a tank top at work. Why is that inappropriate? It's not. I think it's inappropriate because the church told me it was inappropriate, and then I just kind of let the thought go. So that works for me.
That's a great point. Oh, did you go, Maggie?
Yeah, I was going to just.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Julia is absolutely right about the private thing, not saying the private thing out loud, because I think that we beat ourselves up when we're trying to deconstruct this stuff. And we still have the thoughts. We still look at something and say something incredibly judgmental, maybe even racist or sexist or homophobic or transphobic. We still say it in our heads. But there is a big difference between that being a knee-jerk reaction and it coming out of our mouths or through our fingertips. We still are going to have those. Truth Spinner, I'm going to pick on you because you said something about how you were a misogynist. No, you are a misogynist, just like I'm a misogynist, just like I'm a racist. We're all those alcoholics, right? We're not recovering. We're not whatever. We are alcoholics.
You're past it though.
But yeah, we're trying. That's the difference. John Dehlin was just attacked by Kwaku for saying he was a racist, for John Dehlin saying that he himself was a racist. No, John is right. That's exactly what John is. That's exactly what I am. That's exactly what probably all of us here are. We need to be able to acknowledge this and not let it eat us from the inside out. And we need to be able to hear our inner thoughts and not have judgment on them, not be like, oh my gosh, you know what? This whole deconstruction thing isn't working. I'm just going to go back to the way I was, or I'm just going to hate myself. No, those are things that just happen. They just do. And I really like how Julia talked about how she processes it and then lets it go. And that's really what we have to do. And we have to stop putting some sort of time limit or goal on it. Like, why am I still feeling this way after 2 years? Honey, I've lived with this body my entire life and I'm still racist and sexist. I've been deconstructing so many different things and then finding out that I need to deconstruct more and continuing to do it. This is going to be a forever thing. I'm going to be on my deathbed thinking these stupid thoughts. It is what it is.
And I think it's important just to like throw out there, this is not an Mormon thing. This is a societal thing. Everybody in society has these problems. It's not just us. It's not just ex-Mormons. It's not just ex-fundies. It's everybody's working on this, and everybody's at different levels. So it's fine. Like, just, you're going to have to work your whole life, because not only do you have the ex-Mormon stuff, you have the societal stuff, you have, you know, whenever you were born, how you grew up. It's all compounded, but everyone is dealing with that, or should be dealing with that.
I just wanted to say that I tried to jump in because I knew I was going to lose it immediately after you said it. Just that as ex-Mormons, we also have to be compassionate to ourselves, because we were literally brainwashed into thought stopping whenever we thought things that were controversial. So we have literally trained ourselves how to think in a completely backwards way. And we're not only having to deconstruct these, racism, sexism, all of these other things, we're also deconstructing the way that we were taught to think, and the way that we were taught to like not criticize those things, and the way that we were taught to deflect from the painful parts. So we also have to be compassionate about ourselves, because we're still learning how to think properly and to respond to things properly as well.
I think going with that, something that's like, one of the reasons why it's important to recognize that I am a misogynist, I am a racist, is it allows you to be able to accept when somebody points out to you how you're being misogynistic or how you're being racist. If you don't think that you're misogynistic or that you're racist or you're sexist or anything like that, then you're not going to accept when somebody points that out to you. But if you acknowledge that you have that in you, when people point it out to you, or when you have those thoughts come up and you start to process them, it's a lot more acceptable, and you're a lot more willing to be kind to yourself and to correct the issues there.
One thing I'm going to toss in on. So another thing that I deconstructed pretty early on, like I was an ally to LGBTQ before I left the faith. And I noticed that, like it or not, that's how it was. The most effective allies to LGBTQ were often cisgender hetero people, because it showed, hey, I'm on this side, or if you want to break it down into sides, hey, I'm over on this side, but I recognize that I'm in a place of privilege. Yeah, Chloe, you said something about awareness of privilege really early on. And coming from the place of privilege to advocate for those that don't have that privilege, I find is an extremely powerful and an extremely effective place to come from. And even though I was called out on virtue signaling here and there when I started talking about misogyny on my TikTok, I decided to keep on talking about it anyway, and I'm going to keep on talking about it, even if I keep on getting called out for virtue signaling. And it's because I recognize that, as a cisgender hetero man, I come from a place of privilege. So it seems to be just how it is. But those individuals that have that privilege and advocating for those that don't, those are really effective allies.
One of the hardest parts of deconstructing for me has been like the fear and the what if side of things. Like, what if I really, like, my opinion really isn't like worth it? Like, hearing like other people hearing, what if my like intelligence isn't enough, like the church told me, what if, like, just the fear of me not actually being enough like I think that I am, and me just being what the church says that I am. And it's been very hard to deconstruct that and to teach myself to think something different.
I think that it's another one. I think I jumped in and then I lost it. Okay, you can come back to me.
I think going off of what Truth Spinner was saying, it's also important, like when you're deconstructing, when you're trying to be an ally to someone, don't be a white savior. You're not going to be the face of the movement. It's their movement. It's not your movement. You are not the white savior. You need to shut up, listen, think, and then do what you're told. And that's the best way to be a good ally.
I just want to throw this out there too, because I've seen this happen so often. Never, ever use the activism you do in allyship as cred. Never say, I can't be racist. I marched with BLM. I can't be sexist. I voted for Hillary. Never do that, because it undoes. You didn't do it then. You didn't do it for an actual cause. You did it for brownie points. And
that is virtue signaling.
That is virtue
Absolutely.
signaling. Exactly.
No, and the other two mistakes, just to chime in on the other, the two biggest mistakes that I see in both calling people out and trying to rein it all in is twofold. Is one is the virtue signaling and the comparing. The like, what do you can't have trauma, I have trauma, and people start to get into trauma Olympics, and you're like, congratulations, and it undercuts everyone when you get into trauma Olympics. And then the other one that is to kind of chime right off of Maggie's is that, or to call out someone's bad behavior as privilege doesn't help. It's like Julia was saying earlier, like there were people that were both wrong, men and women. Just calling out the women is wrong. That's absolutely true. And that's right to point out. And you can point that out as that, and that's true. But if you say, hey, that's just your privilege talking, how does that help? Is what I said wrong? If what I said was wrong, tell me where it's wrong. Don't point out that because I'm white, I must be, or because I'm male, I must be, or because I'm cisgendered, I must. Pointing out the problems are so good. And that's one of the other things that people feel so defensive and so attacked, is it gets to these trauma Olympics and calling out people for things they can't help on all over the side. And it gets so minimizing, even amongst people that are trying to grow together. It's the crabs in the boiling water all over again.
I think a lot of issues, we've kind of talked about this with like defensiveness and people. We came from, as Mormons, we came from this place of such complete 100% total certainty in the way that we saw the world, in the way that we saw ourselves, in our standing with the world, where other people stood and where we were. And when it comes to like deconstructing not just like Mormonism, but also all of these other things like racism and sexism, we're in this very nebulous void. And there's not really a whole lot of solids that we can hold on to, because we have to constantly recognize that there could be other behaviors that we have that we don't know about yet, because we're too privileged at this point to even recognize we're having them. And I was talking with another friend who's done some similar kind of deconstruction to me. They weren't ex-Mormon, but we were just talking about how it can hurt sometimes to constantly be seeing more and more injustice in the world, and to realize how many things that you have to unlearn beyond just Mormonism. And so it can be a stressful place to be continually trying to learn and be an ally, but trying to stay in a point of humility and recognizing that, like, it's okay if you don't know everything anymore. Like, having that 100% certainty was part of the reason why it was so wrong, is because it was so solid and didn't allow any room for flexibility.
Okay, so on that note, I have to leave because it's late for me and I gotta go to bed. So it was thank you for inviting me to be on. I have to figure out how to leave now.
All right, bye, Julia. We'll see you later. All right, does anybody else have anything to add to this? All right, so we'll move on to our final topic before we do the questions and answers. And our final topic is, how do we, after recognizing the sexism and how to deconstruct it, how do we keep it from coming back again? And how do we call it out when we see it to stop it?
What was the last sentence there, Maddie? Sorry, what was that last sentence?
How do we call it out and stop it?
Gotcha.
Okay, so the reality is Like, we don't, to all of the above. Like, my point being that we're going to fail. We're going to continuously fail at doing this. We're going to continuously fail we're never going to fully stop it, for one. And if that's the goal, you're going to exhaust yourself real quick. Like, really, it's about mitigating the damage. It's about making things less prevalent and helping those who are hurt when we can, by not being hurt to begin with. But we're going to repeatedly fail at this. We're going to let our own biases, our privileges, and also our own, mental health issues and sadness and all of these other things, we're going to let them interfere, or they simply are going to interfere with our ability to speak out sometimes. And it is what it is. So we need to remember those two things. We need to remember that we are never going to make this work perfectly. It won't. And that we are going to fail, and we need to be okay with both of those. We need to go into this realizing that we are not white knights who are going to make everything better for everyone. But that being said, the way that we do it is by exercising our voices, by educating ourselves, and being able to inform others with a level head and kindness. And I'm not talking dripping sweetness. I'm talking not going straight for the jugular when someone makes a mistake. I'm, like, just gentle reminders and standing strong and having the backs of people who are being pushed with these things is incredibly important.
If I could jump in kind of on the back of that, absolutely. And then also from an internal standpoint of our own, like correcting it, of course, when we see it and correcting ourselves. But the problem that we see so much is that people conflate in themselves impact and intent. They're like, well, I couldn't have done that. I'm a good person. I didn't mean to do it. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. If they're going to get mad because it's something I didn't even mean, impact and intent are wholly unrelated from a cognition standpoint, from an external and internal point. So working on your intent, did you mean to be a misogynist? Did you mean to belittle them? Okay, cool. That's something you should work on. That is absolutely to be considered. And then at the exact same time, I didn't mean it like that. Okay, but did it happen? Like, did you still hurt the person? Like, oh man, I used the wrong pronouns. I used their dead name. I did something wrong. Shoot, I'm such an idiot. Okay, you didn't mean to. They probably know that. Make an apology. Make the statement you need to. Fix the impact and do better. And when you screw this up tomorrow, fix the impact and do better. But impact, and the biggest problem we see, and we see it in social media comments so much, is that people use their intent to deflect their impact, or the other way, they affect the lack of impact to block the intent. Whatever, it didn't hurt anybody, so what does it matter? Neither of those things make any sense. If you meant to hurt someone and be an asshole, just because it didn't doesn't make you not an asshole. And likewise, just because you didn't mean to be doesn't mean you weren't. And those two things have to be judged and accounted for both internally and externally as if they are completely unrelated, because they are.
I think one that I'm going to toss in here, and it's not about any particular situation, but it just applies everywhere. And everyone can individually do this, and if everyone did, the world would just be a better place. Don't double down. Don't double down. Don't double down. That's all I have to say.
Not talking about anyone in particular. Got it.
Okay. One thing that I especially like with certain things that have happened recently, one thing that I have noticed is sometimes people forget that we all grew up with a certain mindset, and some people will have that mindset their entire lives, and there is nothing you can do about it. And there's nothing you can say, nothing will convince that other person, because you don't have the same mind as them. You don't know what it would take for them to actually listen to your point. And sometimes we need to give ourselves more credit and understand that we have done what we can do and to just leave it alone, you know.
I really like that. Actually kind of reminds me of this. One of the things I had talked to someone recently in a completely non-Mormon, non-gender discussion was about like the communication of prisons. I swear this is going somewhere very quickly. Is the point of prisons to rehabilitate, or is the point of prisons to punish? And the concept goes on to here is like, how do we move this? If we all want to punish misogynists, first off, that's not going to work. But if the idea is to punish and get our pound of flesh, if punishment and cancel culture is the point, that's one goal, and there's an approach to that. If rehabilitation and re-education and reintegration is the point, it is a completely separate set of goals. It's a completely separate approach. So there's a lot of people out there right now that they're not wrong in the facts they have, but they're wrong in the approach of they clearly want their pound of flesh. They clearly want to just destroy the patriarchy, which cool. Like that's the goal. But that's when people say double down and then double down and then double down because they're getting attacked. Where if the idea is reintegration and rehabilitation and re-education, that is an entirely separate communications goal. That's a completely different approach pattern. And it's the same thing as the impact and intent. If we approach every individual, every misogynist, every asshole that we approach with integration and re-education in mind, that is a different thing than I'm going to beat up a misogynist today. And we have to keep that in mind.
I don't disagree with you, Kirk, but you're also wrong.
Okay.
So no, but seriously, I don't disagree with you about this, but I will say this. There are caveats to this. There's nuance to this. Of course, some people are going to be angry, hurt, upset by these things. You may be the first white guy. Like you may go up to this person that you've just met as a white cis het male and say something incredibly offensive, and that person is going to rip you a new asshole. And the thing is that you are the 17th that day that came up to that person and said that thing. So I understand what you're saying. I absolutely understand it. But we also have to put some of the work, there we go, on the misogynist, on the racist, on the other people as well. We have to do it with ourselves. But we also have to stop this idea that it's the people who are defending themselves or pushing back. It's always their responsibility to make others comfortable and whatnot. And don't get me wrong, I'm going to say it again. I completely agree with what you said. I do. I completely agree. I'm speaking more from the angle of outside looking in, not necessarily as tactically, because you're right, tactically, what works and what doesn't. Also, note that I'm having to continuously go for the ego, tell you you're right, tell you this is like total like just conditioning on my part. I'm not saying it's your fault, but I'm saying it's conditioning on my part that I'm having to tell this white guy, no, you're right, it's fine, it's okay.
I haven't been pinning comments, but this one was too good to not. Rob Phillips, it's not a conversation till Maggie says Kirk is wrong. That's just facts. So cool.
Speaking of white men who think that they can tell me, they can come at me. Anyway, but yeah, I think that just from an onlooker's point of view, we tend to, I don't know, Monday morning quarterback this or Monday morning whatever. I don't know what that phrase is because I'm not a sports person, but where we tend to judge people for the way that they're responding to these sorts of things. And honestly, we also have to keep in mind that this is an ongoing thing with so many communities that it gets freaking exhausting, and some people are going to lash out and they're not going to have like the right tactics like in mind. And that's okay too. And it's okay to hold the people who need to do the work accountable as well for maybe not sticking their foot in their mouth instead of holding those who are having a reaction to it accountable for that reaction.
I think to add on to it's that way. Okay. To add on to what Maggie was just saying, it's the job of education should not be on the victims of misogyny or any other issues that we're talking about. So I think a lot of what Kirk was talking about is applicable if you are in standing from the place of privilege, that it should be your job to be the one to be kind, to do your best to re-educate those people. But you also need to recognize that the people who are experiencing the brunt of those things may not be able to be articulate and educating and have the emotional energy to put in the emotional labor required to educate people as they're being microaggressed or whatever. So I think just recognizing that as well. Like, I think when you're coming from a place of privilege, you do have a little bit more of a little bit more freedom in how you approach people who are being negative towards different groups.
All right. Does anybody else have anything to add? Okay. Let's move on to the questions and answers portion. So we can either take questions from the live comments, but I also have a couple questions that I would like to ask everyone on the panel. So to start off, for the guys, what is the biggest way that your emotional well-being was impacted by the way that you were taught about your gender?
I kind of talked about this a little bit at the very beginning of just like, I remember, so I'm the youngest of 4 boys. And I remember, you know, when my dad was out of town, which much like Truth Spinner was all the time, he was military, he was gone all the time. So like, but when he was gone, my oldest brother would call on someone to say prayers. And when he was gone, my next oldest brother would say, so it was not only, it was patriarchal and hierarchical by age. And I remember, again, youngest, that it always made me really excited at the age of 8, 9, 10, when it was only me and my mom eating dinner together, because then I got to make the choice between the 2 of us, which was saying the prayer. And I remember as I was getting older, like that coming into that as I got older and older, I have the priesthood. And my dad, when I became 12 and was given the priesthood, you have as much power as and you're given this mantle and you're given this thing and you're told every week how important and how powerful that is. And then all of a sudden that is really, really, there's no words for it. It's not a good thing. It's a very damaging mentality that you can do no wrong and the other people are beneath you, and that you know, even your mom, you as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old boy have some degree of dominion or stewardship because you are male. And the sheer weight of that reality didn't kick in until I was in my late 20s, but it was very real, and it's very systemic and endemic to the culture.
Yeah, I would say, well, for one, I unfortunately grew up with an absent father. Good man, but yeah, that just happened. There's a whole thing to unpack there, and I just haven't yet. The effects that come with having an absent father. But one thing that I would like to speak to in particular, I noticed that I am really connecting to emotions for the first time. I feel like the constructs that I had learned on how to behave in my gender role, I was to be strong and stoic and not allowed to show pain or suffering. And when you don't do that, you end up just holding a lot of trauma inside of you, and it stays there until you die.
All right. Did anyone else want to answer that question?
I mean, first off, Kirk, you're not the only one who had that experience with the parents. Thankfully, or with the hierarchical thing. I was growing up. I was the oldest son, so yeah. Thankfully for me, though, my oldest sister called me out on it when I was like 13, and that helped me recognize that it was an issue. But going in another direction for me personally, I mean, obviously I'm learning a lot about myself now, exploring what my gender identity is, and learning a ton there. And those were things that were actively suppressed in my youth, and up. I'm 26 now, and still trying to figure out who I am, what my identity is, all these different things, and that has been a wild ride for me, and really impactful. And it's 100% down to the teachings of the church, and everything dealing with that for me.
Oh, go ahead, Derek.
Is that okay? Kirk, I think what you were mentioning to it before was talking about like how the roles, the different gender roles that are initiated by church leaders also affects us too as well. So the roles of the male is to provide, be the provider, and the woman to glorify God is to bear children and raise those children at home. So to answer your question, Maddie, how it affected me mentally, um, something that would have affected me is career-wise. So my sisters, it wouldn't have been second thought for my sister to not even go to college, but if she did go to college, is spend as little time there as possible. Whereas if I had thought of a career where, I don't know, maybe I just wanted to be um, a speech therapist assistant or something like that, or even like right now I'm a teacher. If I had told my parents I just wanted to go to school to become a teacher's aide, I feel like they would have sat me down and been like, look, you are a priesthood holder, therefore maybe you need to make your goals, you know, a little bit more ambitious, or go to school a lot more, because therefore you need to fulfill the role as provider. So mental wise, like it did put a lot of pressure on me, and also considering I was the only one to finish university in my family too as well, it was a lot of pressure to be the provider, as opposed to I don't know, really trying to fulfill just career ambitions. So hopefully that helped out.
I actually want to chime in and tag on back to my own. It's also, this isn't strictly to gender, other than missions are predominantly more encouraged to males, and that is that as young men, we are told, we are commanded, you will go on a mission, you will spend 2 years, and then we spend time in the MTC, and then we're sent out to every corner of the world where our core goal is to have the entire world tell us we're crazy, and us let that roll off our back and tell them, no, in fact, we're right. Everyone is wrong but us. And we are trained at a fundamental foundational age to ignore reason and logic as everyone laughs at us and stick to the story. Unlearning that is a lot. It isn't just like oh, I guess I was. Forget the information. We were boot camp trained at 18, 19 years old to ignore everything that wasn't told to us by the church, as we were sent from door to door, laughed at, mocked, teased, I mean, depending on where you served, in varying degrees of severity. I mean, I have crazy stories from my mission of getting into fights with Baptist ministers and being laughed at and having people throw tomatoes and water balloons at me. Like, I have all the, and every day it made me stronger and made me love the Lord more. And that is what they tell you. And that is it's not a gender issue specifically, but it's a thing that they teach. And so then even if we leave the church, we still have this, hey, I can't be wrong. I have been trained to let all that stuff bounce off me and be right. And again, that sticks with you.
All right. So my next question, I have one more, and then everyone else, like, go ahead, ask your questions, or we can take questions from the comments. But for the women, what was the moment that you realized that your gender affected you and you weren't the same, you know, as men?
I think I have an interesting perspective to that question. I kind of to answer both questions. I grew up with a lot of self-loathing because the gender roles, it's impossible for them to be more strict and more binary and more defined than they are in the church, and more different. And there's already, I just remember growing up and desperately wanting to connect with other women and talk to other women and socialize with other women. That's healthy even as a young trans woman. That's a healthy reaction to have. And we were socialized so differently that there's just this level of disconnect that was never going to be overcome. And I think the fact that I was given this responsibility because of this gender that I didn't want, and I was supposed to do all of these things, and that it also meant that I was going to be this gender forever, was incredibly mentally damaging. And it just, and with what Kirk talked about, taking all of the negative like thoughts and other things and throwing them away, I remember just taking all of those doubts and questions and frustrations about my own identity and just shoving it down because the church is true, and all of this has to be the way that it is. So I'm just not allowed to question my own gender. That's just how it is. And it forced me to get to a point where I had to get to a very, very emotionally low point where I had to say, okay, do I keep living as I am now, or do I throw away the identity that I was raised my entire life on? And it shouldn't have been like that. If I had been raised in a religion that wasn't as insane, it wasn't so insane in their strict gender norms, it wouldn't have had to be such a huge toss-up.
I guess I'll go. Can you just repeat the question real quick, Maddie? I want to make sure that I got it.
Yes. It's what was like the moment, or like, was there a specific moment where you realized that you were meant for something different, or like you were different from men within the church?
I would say, and I've never thought about this, so this is just total, just off the top of my head. I would say it was when I was a child, 6 maybe, and I couldn't go with my grandpa to priesthood. My grandpa was my best friend at that time, and I couldn't go with him at church stuff. And I just remember sitting at church, and I had a lot of anxiety, so I went to Relief Society with my grandmother and sat on her lap. But I just remember just counting down the moments until I could see my grandpa again. And every waking moment I spent that wasn't at school was with him. So having to be separated at church just didn't play well in my mind. Like, I didn't understand why we were different and that we went to different things. And that was really the first time it was explained to me about the priesthood and stuff. So that was probably the big one for me.
For me, I'll answer this question too, and then we can move on. For me, it was when I was 9, I believe, when Gordon B. Hinckley died. It was like all over the TV, and like my parents were watching like the whole thing and everything. And I was talking to my dad, and I was like, do you think I could be the prophet someday? Like, is that possible? And my dad was like, well, no, you can't be the prophet. You're a girl, you know? And I was like, well, why can't I be like in a position of leadership? Why am I not allowed to do that? And then going on and getting older and learning that women really aren't allowed in any positions of leadership within the church that are actually influential and meaningful, you know? And that was just very difficult. And I remember thinking, like, as like a little kid, I don't really want to be a woman because of all this, you know? And it's not that I didn't want to be a woman, it's that I didn't want to be in that position, and I wished that I had just been born differently so that I could be in that position. Okay, so if anybody has anything else to say, go ahead. If not, we can start taking questions from the comments. All right, Kirk, can you put up any questions?
Sure can. Some of these aren't as much questions as there were some really cool comments that I think we should definitely highlight or discuss. Alia said a while back when we were talking about, the men and the men's priesthood stuff, as a mother of 4 boys, this stuff breaks my heart. I never want them to look at their wives as lesser, but I also don't want them the extreme pressure on them to be more, provide more, know more, stronger, better, smarter. I want them to find the yin to their yang, someone strong to their weak points, and them be strong to their partner's weaknesses. And it's awesome. I love this comment, but it's strange because there's so much that I could say. TBM Kirk 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Kirk would have been like, what are you talking about? That's exactly what the church teaches. Like, I can show you the lessons. That's exactly what the church teaches. And now I look at it as like, except that it's like super not. And I just, when that popped up, I was like, man, I can point to the talks that a TBM would use to say that is what they teach. But it's not. Any comments on that? There's other comments I wanted to definitely highlight that came in.
I just think of I don't remember who said it, but there was a specific apostle that said it, and I know it's a general belief that you can just marry whoever. As long as they're Mormon, it doesn't matter who you marry. You can just marry whenever, whoever, as long as you're both married in the temple, it's going to be fine. And
yeah,
it's so...
Hacker, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Any two temple worthy people can make a celestial marriage work. And you're like, wow, I'll take bullshit for 500, Alex.
Yeah, that right there. I didn't know that this was going to come up, but that was something that really affected me. Because I was an aging, we'll say, because now I'm 31. I was an aging YSA when I was in the faith, and I was actively taught by certain leaders that I was being selfish, that attraction wasn't as important as I was making it to be, and that I needed to just pick somebody and make it happen. I narrowly dodged 3 potential marriages that I'm like 90% convinced would have ended in divorce.
That teaching kept me in a toxic relationship and a bad marriage for 3 years longer than it should have been. Yeah.
I actually think this next comment plays as a really good segue moving on. The church is also harmful to men in the fact that women are expected and required to do a majority of the emotional labor. So you have a bunch of adult men who don't know how to I can read, I swear, who don't know how to emotionally function on their own. And that's really true as well. I absolutely think, as a completely emotionally stunted individual, I will say that that men we aren't taught to be emotionally supportive. We aren't taught that we should be emotionally supported. We're taught we should keep our hands down and work, make money, be a priesthood holder, shut up and stop complaining. And by the time that catches up to us at around 38, by the way, thank you all for making me realize that I'm the oldest person on this panel. You all suck. Yeah, suddenly you wake up and realize you're like, I'm a grown-ass man that has absolutely no idea how to function as an emotional individual, because that was never taught to me as a priority, both internally or externally.
I would just like to first off point out that is not specifically like an issue just to people who to men who grew up in the church. It's like a America issue pretty much.
No, that's absolutely.
But it's absolutely magnified within the church for sure.
Anybody out there who's listening, there's people that need to hear this. Brene Brown, look into her, get some books.
She's great. So then Rebecca Kresge, this comment will make a little bit more sense.
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Maggie. I apologize. I keep me back with a whip and a chair. Go for it.
Don't you dare. First of all, I just wanted to say, can we bring that comment back up? I just wanted to say that this person appears to be incredibly intelligent, and I would love to get to know her more for what she's been able to point out here. A bunch of adult men who don't know how to emotionally function on their own. I completely agree with this, and this is partly because of the Mormon thing, partly because of American culture, as Maddie brought up, although it does extend beyond American culture. It's almost universal, which fascinates me, but whatever, that's a whole other conversation. But this is also a woman thing. But it's the thing is that I find so interesting, and not to kick the hornet's nest on whether or not we have gendered brains or whether or not gender is innate or anything. Regardless of that, we do have these sort of like differences in the way that men and women think and interact and express emotionally, innately or socially, or whatever the cause may be. That's still the reality. So I think that for a lot of this with men who are unable to emotionally function on their own, and with the women who are also unable to emotionally function on their own, which is a fun breeding ground for codependent relationships. But I think that a big issue with that is that we need to also accept that men and women emotionally function on their own in different ways, and that especially as individuals, we do in different ways. And it's super important that we see that and learn how to function in our own little pool of crazy, our own little pool of like our unique ability to suck. And we need to like really understand that as ourselves and work forward with that and work outward with that as well. But also, I think it's really tempting to, as people, see the way that other people are failing at this or are struggling with this and not see it necessarily in ourselves, which can cause even bigger issues around being able to really process this stuff, to really understand these things. And oh, I had a point, and then my kid just ran by the window, and now I'm thinking about my kid running by the window. Damn it. My brain just squirreled live.
Parenting.
Oh crap, what was my point? Oh my gosh. Well, there that went.
Don't worry, Maggie. You're my hero. Don't even worry.
You're not the first person to start talking and then lose what they were saying. So
it happens. So moving on to this next comment. So Rebecca Kresge said it a while ago. So to contextualize this comment, which I think is really important, and I definitely want to hear some of the women talk about, is so Rebecca Kresge, I was her Sunday school teacher when she was 15, 16. And she was extremely ostracized because she was an alt girl, crazy hair and dark eyeliner. And I loved her to death. And so like she wasn't assigned to my class, but I always like pulled her over because like I would engage with her, and I was really good friends with her parents and grandparents. And so I always made sure that she was around. She moved to Arizona when she was 16, 17. So in this, she says, in Arizona, I went to girls' camp here, and they did a fashion show of immodest outfits. And one girl came out with all black clothing on and black eyeshadow, and such, that one of the stories that I have that made me realize Mormonism was not right. Like, so just so we're clear, to contextualize this, that was directly, I mean, I don't know the full thing, but at least from Rebecca's perspective, that was mocking her. And I will say that, again, I never went to girls' camp. That's not true, but that's another story. I never went to girls' camp, but I will say this: the cattiness and the competitiveness and the virtual signaling and you're not worthy enoughness on both sides, I saw very real growing up. And I'd love to hear more about that.
This is a big one for me.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Maggie.
Okay. This is a big one for me because I was alt way back when it was, whatever. And I had goth friends who were Mormon. And this was a huge, huge thing with how, even though my goth friend who is Mormon was dressed modestly. I mean, honestly, let's be honest, like goths actually cover more, but it wasn't okay because she was wearing all black, because she dyed her hair black, because she was wearing like darker makeup and everything. Like this level of immodesty, I think that a lot of times people don't understand is that for Mormons, it's more than just how much you're showing. It's also your color scheme and the sorts of community that you're, but you really have to look like a cookie cutter, like honestly. And so I remember thinking I was overreacting. Like as I got older, I was overreacting. They really weren't that cruel. But then when I got older, I remember sitting in a Relief Society and they went off on this whole thing when talking about immodesty, where people were sharing stories about, well, I knew a woman who dyed her hair like electric red, and she clearly did it for attention. And then they went around talking about how it was all for attention. And when you wear this and this and this, it's all for attention. And it's just women wanting to seem better than these women, which I thought, oh, there's the crux of the issue. You guys feel like you're being attacked by people not buying into your message of modesty and style and standards. But yeah, it was like such a huge thing that changed the way that I would express myself. Cause I was pretty alt, like my husband was pretty alt when we met each other. Honestly, the third day I met him, I bleached and dyed his mohawk like neon green. And so then we go into the church and we stop being that way. And it became like a thing for us where we were trying so hard to both hold on to our identity as being alt, but also conform to what was expected of us so that we were good servants of God and dress that, and for me, a lot of it came down to, and this is hilarious, but a lot of it came down to, I would dress really similarly to the way the women would dress, but there would always be that one thing that was off. And for me, it was my leopard print shoes. Like I had these, and this was before it was cool. Like I had these really gaudy leopard print shoes that I would just wear everywhere. And yeah, once I did get chastised though for wearing red to a funeral, but there's that.
I think clothing in Mormonism, especially with women, is about conformity and virtue signaling more so than it is the actual whatever it is that you're wearing. If you're not wearing it specifically to fit in, it doesn't matter what it actually is. That's why I think, even though technically the goth clothes fit into the modesty standards, you're not wearing it to conform. You're not wearing it to look like everyone else and to look like you're going to church. And that's why it's an issue, which I feel like a lot of the more external issues with Mormonism have to do with that virtue signaling and the need to conform, because it's such a strong peer pressure too, because then you start backing it up with all of these harmful doctrines that come along with it too.
Anyone else? Or I can move on. I'll move on to the next one. Here we go. So, Rob Phil, does realizing that you were lied to about everything by the church make it easier or harder to question preconceptions about race, gender, since it came from the same place? I have a quick answer to that and say that I would say it makes it sort of easier, but that's assuming that you're thinking about everything all the time, which you're not. It's sometimes you like a thought will come up that you're like, wow, I haven't addressed that one in a while. That's old. Like things come up that are so ingrained and so old that they don't get revisited until it's I think Julia talked about it earlier. I'm at work and someone's wearing something inappropriate. It's like, well, that is inappropriate. Wow. I need to check that one. That these reactions come up somewhat involuntarily and they don't come up all the time. So you don't get to address them till they come back up. And you just have to hope that you have the cognizance to notice it before you say something stupid, which I usually don't, but that's a different conversation.
I, for one, have a very hard time with this personally because I tend to judge myself a lot because I was always taught to judge myself, always be making sure that I'm a good person and that I'm doing the right thing and like that I'm on top of my stuff, And there was this one particular story that they told us in Young Women's, and it was like a modesty lesson and stuff like that. And they were like, yeah, I like saw these girls at the store like on Halloween, and they were like wearing really revealing outfits, and I just kept seeing them pull on their clothing because like it was cold outside and blah blah blah. And so now every time I pull on my clothing just to like adjust it or something, if it's something immodest that I'm adjusting, I always like am very self-conscious of myself adjusting my clothes. And it's very hard to like break out of particular mindsets like that, because you're taught to think, hey, this is something that I'm doing that's wrong. I shouldn't be wearing this. And because I'm doing the thing that they said, the other people who are bad people and like being immodest are doing, that makes me a bad person. And it's really hard to try to break out of that.
I'll maybe hop in with a little bit of a different perspective. I kind of went all in with deconstructing things because I literally at the same time I realized I was trans, and then I realized I needed to leave the church. And it wasn't until about a year later that I actually deconstructed the beliefs of the church. But because so much blew up at once, I was already very much in a nothing is real, nothing can exist mindset. And I do think that deconstructing something so big, it doesn't necessarily make you immediately question everything more, but I think it does make it easier for you to break down preconceived notions once you realize that there's the potential that this thing, that you could have the wrong perspective on something.
I actually also want to add into this, and this is less of a addition and more of a, I want to cue Maggie on something that I think she has a comment on. But so I have a sister-in-law that's 4'11" and has an E cup, and it doesn't matter if she's wearing a muumuu, she will get shamed for what she's wearing. It doesn't matter. Her body type has put her into a category, and I know that I've heard Maggie comment on this in other videos, so I'd love to include that here because it's an important point.
Yes, thank you for bringing up my boobs. I love talking about it.
I didn't. Thank you, Maggie.
You're welcome. No, I'm serious though. This is a big one for me because it's totally get it, but it's totally true. It's absolutely true. The way that no matter what, if you don't fall under that same sort of cookie cutter appearance, then you are, what's the word? I want to say asking for it, but you're basically asking to be judged. You're like standing outside of those things, like where there's not, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, it doesn't matter that your body, okay, let's take my hair, for example. My hair was always a mess. Doesn't matter how curly, how perfect the curls were. My hair was always a mess. Always. It was never done properly. It was never, good enough for church. It was always a mess. And it's the same with my outfits. I was always immodest because I had such a big chest. So it just, and to go into what Rob what he was saying, is it easier or harder to question the preconceived notions about race and gender? So it is from the same place. I would say that it's easier to question, but harder to come to a conclusion. I think the questioning part is easy, but trusting ourselves in a conclusion of anything after leaving Mormonism is incredibly difficult. Because can we really trust ourselves? Do we really know what we're thinking? Can we trust the authorities who are telling us that this and this and this is true? Like, even if it's scientifically, even if it's whatever, like, can we trust anyone, let alone ourselves and our own thought process? So I think that that's a huge, huge thing. And side note, Castanedas, please. This isn't for anyone but my husband. Castanedas, carne asada fries, no tomato. I'm just making my dinner order. Go on.
That was amazing. That's my favorite part of the entire evening, when Maggie ordered dinner over a podcast. Okay, next comment. So Tabitha Donahue said something really cool, interesting when we were talking a comment or two ago. She's like, oppression always pits marginalized people against each other, like the situation at girls' camp. And I think that's so to touch on this both in and out of the church as well. It's that conformity we were talking about. It doesn't matter. I think it was Chloe who said, like, it doesn't matter if it's modest or immodest, if it's not actively trying to fit into the norm, if it's not like, we were told on the mission, quiet dignity, don't try to stand out, no vibrant ties, no crazy, don't just because you can get a polyester suit at the thrift store for $3 and it looks sick, don't wear that, because that Derek is shaking his head like he had the exact same experience. I'm just saying that. Like it doesn't.
True.
What's that?
It's true. Conservative ties is what they said. Conservative ties.
Yeah, conservative ties. Modern suits. Nice. You couldn't express any degree of personality because that was sinful. That was loud. That you had to be quiet dignity, likened unto the Savior. Blah blah, and you had to suppress anything that set you outside. And that is. So much so that if I wore Doc Martens that were boots instead of low tops, and I had zone leaders talk to me about it, like, was that really the shoe the Savior would wear? And I was like, no, but I'm not allowed to wear Birkenstocks. Make up your mind. So it's pinning the people against each other is such a tactic used, and it's anyway.
Jump in here. Sorry, it goes marriage as well. Oppression always pits marginalized people against each other in marriage as well. And we sort of talked about this a little bit with all of the other stuff, like with working from out of home, working blah, blah, blah. We do this with marriage, or I'm sorry, Mormons do this with marriage. Hate how I still slip up and say we.
Yeah. I feel like this was absolutely like a thing, and it was a huge thing in young women's, especially like women being pitted against women, especially like when you're growing up and like learning what you think and what you value and everything. Like in young women's, like we were always told, okay, we have to like go for a husband, and we shouldn't be like interested in going to college or going on a mission or anything like that. We need to be going for a husband. And at BYU and everything, it's just a bunch of women pitted against each other trying to get like the best husband. And it teaches us, one, that we need to judge other women, and that just keeps us from being able to move past the sexism that we were taught, and keeps us from being united as women.
When I saw this comment, this is a little bit on a different topic, but I thought of the website that was up for a little while, Mormons and Gays, where they took all of the token gays that still considered themselves active and told their stories about how they overcame their homosexuality and how if they did it and could still be members without ever expressing real romance or sexual intimacy, then you could too. And I think about all of the stories that I heard growing up about people who were gay. I don't remember any specific stories about being trans, but those kinds of things where if people who had behaviors or attitudes, even something as simple as drinking coffee, they're like held up as examples, as look, this person had this thing and they didn't do it, so we're going to use the fact that they didn't do it and say that you shouldn't do it either, and to kind of like bully you almost into conforming.
It's the trauma Olympics again. Hey, they managed, why can't you?
blacklds.org.
That's a thing?
Yeah, blacklds.org. It's a thing that I used to reference all the time when I was trying to be an apologist, like for the Mormon Church, and it still exists. But that's exactly what that reminds me of. It's a site. It's a website.
I'll have to look into that. I've never heard of that.
I'm just laughing at all of the faces, the expressions that popped up when you just said that.
Nice. So the next comment I actually kind of want to talk about as well, because it plays into a pet peeve that I had, a scathing, raise my hand at elders quorum, scathing pet peeve I had for a decade while still in the church. And this is Cassie Willis, another former young woman when I was a Sunday school teacher. When I was told, we were talking about things that were like, left the church. She's like, when I was told that being best friends with a young man was inappropriate, strictly best friends for years. And I know that situation. They really were just friends. They truly platonic best friends, and they were told that they needed to spend less time together, that it was inappropriate. They were both 16, 17. He then went on a mission at 8. Like, it was the coolest relationship. He was actually a pretty cool kid. And they were just and they were absolutely shamed about their friendship. I went to see many years ago, I went to Utah to see some friends of mine. They were high school friends that got married. The three of us went to high school together. And I was in town only for a few hours. I was in Provo. It was like 3:30 or so. And I was like, hey, I'm in your neighborhood. I was wondering if I could stop by and say hi. And she's like, yeah, you should come by for dinner. And I'm like, that's awesome. She's like, yeah, Kenny will be home. I was like, that's awesome. I'm just down the street. And she's like, well, Kenny doesn't get home until 5. So please come by after 5, because you being here with me alone would be inappropriate. I've known her since I was 13. Her husband is like one of my best friends. I have known them both forever. I went to their wedding, but me spending 90 minutes so I was like, but I kind of have nowhere to go. She's like, yeah, just drive around or go do whatever. She's like, I don't think it'd be appropriate for you to come over. This mentality is absolutely toxic. And it is found that I couldn't possibly be over there for any reason but to have sex with the married woman, mother of 4, wife of my friend. This concept that men and women can't be friends causes problems that are so bad. It drives me up the wall. Sorry, that's TED Talk over.
Can I add on to that?
Oh, and then I'll add on after, Maddie.
Oh, okay. So this, you kind of just said it, Kirk. This is something that very much plays into rape culture within the Mormon church, especially, but in other places too. When you teach men that the only interactions that they should be having with a woman should be romantic or sexual, that's what they're going to think is going on every time they're alone with a woman. This isn't all men, of course, but that's the kind of men who are going to do these things. That's what they're going to be thinking. And that's what teaches those men to do things like this. And it plays into it like a lot more than people really realize, I think.
And yes, Maddie. And also going into hypersexualization. So shout out to Void for Nobles, TikToker, who went in depth into the For Strength of Youth and talked about how the modesty section for women is more intense than men. And what it does is, for men, what it does is it hypersexualizes women to the point where if we even see shoulders, it's like, wow, it's oh my goodness, right? Hypersexualization. And then the church is struggling, as far as I know, with men and porn addictions. But even if you would say porn is an addiction, but what happens when you hypersexualize women, it makes it a worse problem. So it's like a double negative for the church. And sorry if I'm wrong or misspeaking on any of that, but I just think it's hilarious.
So I'm going to give what I see as not the worst case scenario, but one of the worst case scenarios, and how this has affected relationships and how it's affected some of my relationships with family. So I have an older brother, and it appears that he suffers from quite some amount of scrupulosity, such that I'm not allowed in his home. I would do nothing, and I've never given any indication whatsoever that I'm a threat of any sort, but he's made an umbrella policy, and I, as his younger brother, who has never compromised his trust in any sort of way when it comes to this, I'm not allowed in his home to be around his wife if he's not there. And he has asked me, like, he's had to, like, he's in dental school right now, and he's had to, like, run off to his dental. I've come over to visit, and he's had to run off to the dental school for like 15 minutes to pick up some stuff that he forgot or something. And he has asked me, "Hey, Anthony, I gotta go. Will you please leave my home until I get back?" And I've tried to approach him about this, and I've tried to make him aware, brother, this makes me feel like fundamentally you do not trust me. And he's just said, no, these are our house rules, that it applies to all men. And I'm sorry, there's just, for something that touts that it's all about families, about bringing families together and forever, it does a great job of tearing them apart.
Sorry, that's crazy. I've never heard that. I thought my friend was crazy for not letting me come over, but your brother won't let you be around your sister-in-law without his presence.
That is 100% completely true. My mom came down here to visit me for my birthday, and I was unpacking that and talking with my mom about it just earlier today.
That's fascinating. Fascinating is not the right word, but I can't think of a better one.
And you said that didn't stem from like anything, just like random?
I've tried to talk with him about it and let him know how it made me feel, and how it was really making me distance myself from them, and because I felt like I wasn't trusted at all. And he said, like, they have a lot of rules, because in Mormonism, scrupulosity is very well nurtured, and my brother is a victim to that. For example, so he has that rule: no man is allowed to be in his house if he's not there. And then another one is his kid, like, they'll have their kids, they can have friends over, and their friends can even spend the night and stuff, but they're not allowed to go to their friends' houses, things of that nature. It's just, I've interpreted it as, it's just a pretty extreme case of scrupulosity.
Yeah, I just want to back up what Anthony is saying here. I was raised like that as well, and I grew up around people like that. So I guess I'm sitting here totally not surprised at all. And you guys are all like, what? So I just want to say, I'm not surprised by this at all.
I can expand a little bit just on scrupulosity for those who are wondering. It's a form of OCD that focuses specifically on religious issues and like extreme morality. And so your intrusive thoughts become about anything that you would perceive as immoral. And it becomes this focus. And I don't have OCD, but I have dealt with like scrupulosity and intrusive thoughts in the past that have been related to that. And it's so much worse with Mormonism. Like a majority of what I dealt with in terms of intrusive thoughts and scrupulosity went away when the intense religion went away. So that should tell you something.
All right. Did we want to take any more comments or questions? Let's do like probably 2 more.
So Cassie Willis, again, she just commented this one. Another favorite is dating someone who wasn't Mormon and being hounded on bringing them to church or converting them. And yeah, the flirt to convert thing, very real. Date to reactivate, also very real. A good friend of mine married a non-Mormon, and she was active the whole time and was talked to 3 or 4 times a month about, so, are you going to bring him to church? When are we getting him wet? When are we getting him in the water? Like, I love that face, Maggie. That face actually like sums it up nicely. Yes.
Phrasing.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of an experience with this. One of the families that I was home teaching in my teen years was a mixed faith family, and a big part of it was with my dad. We would strategize how we were going to get lessons that would open him up a little bit more to be able to talk to the missionaries or something like that. And the whole thing was, the entire basis of that friendship, the entire basis of the connection with that family was all strategy, all things that were geared towards trying to convert this person. And we never said it expressly, but like to them or anything like that. But that was very much the underflow of that entire relationship. Was our goal is to figure out ways to get closer, to open up, make them think Mormons are less weird than they are, so that we can open him up so that he can get baptized.
When I was on my mission, there was this book that had come out by this Mormon author. This was maybe 2015 or so. And everybody in the mission was ranting and raving about how amazing it was. And the book basically just said, stop being friends with people specifically to try and convert them. Be their friend first. And that was so novel to people that it was blowing their minds. They're like, this is the most amazing tool. Don't enter into friendships and by extension relationships with people under false pretenses. It's the fact that it was a surprise to people was really wild.
So this is kind of just a funny comment. So, like TBMs, as in true believing Mormons, they often, categorize us as anti-Mormons. We're ex-Mormons, but they categorize us as anti-Mormons. And I have like a TikTok in my drafts where I start to just embrace that and become like the antithesis of Mormonism in each regard and every way. And that was a TikTok that I made where they have their flirt to convert. Why don't we do that? I'm going to go download Mutual and convert attractive young women. Okay, I'll just stop there.
All right. Does anybody else have to say anything with that question? I mean, with that comment? All right.
Can you post that, please? Get it out of your drafts, please.
I'm still like mulling it over. There are so many videos in my drafts that I think might be bad ideas, and I still haven't. The jury is still in on that one.
I will say I wrote an entire book on your bad ideas are your best ideas, so please let those out. Literally, title of the book is The Very Best Bad Idea. So I'm just run with it, man. Run with it. Did you? Cool.
Yeah, I'm reading it.
Awesome.
Is that just a not so subtle plug there, Kurt?
Was it not? I didn't mean to be subtle. I wrote a book. You should buy it.
Also, look at like all of the books behind him.
I was gonna say, I think that's literally the book right there.
It looks like that.
Also, I mean, since we have you here, Chip and I will be going live tomorrow with our podcast where we go through the book.
Yeah, Maggie and I have a Tuesday night live where we talk about the book. I'm just throwing these things out there.
Alrighty. Let's take one more comment and then we can get this ended because I know everybody is probably tired. It's been a long time so far.
So, it's a twofold. It's one comment in two parts, both from Rob Phillips. The first one says, maintaining individual identity in Mormonism is incredibly difficult, regardless of what that identity is. He then followed that up to say, I used to wear mismatched socks to church because F the man. And, just going to throw that out there like, awesome. No, it's to this point, one of the things that I talk a lot about just in general is shadow messages, which is where we are saying one thing and all the things we are saying, it makes a lot of sense. The best example that I use all the time is like the old just say no to drugs. And how can you misunderstand that? Just say no to drugs. It's very simple. But then all of the rhetoric around it on the commercials, it doesn't matter who they are, hot woman or your best friend or your mom or your dad, doesn't matter who they are, just say no. But the shadow message there with all of the associated messages is that everyone is doing drugs but you. Like that's the actual message. And so everything we talked about with, the not trusting spouses or the scrupulosity or everything, you can say, well, it's all about, being pure and chaste and wonderful. It's about being good and, all these wonderful things. But the actual message there is, I don't trust you. The actual message there is, if I take my eyes off of you, if you don't look like you're supposed to. If you wear mismatched shots, Rob, I'm looking at you. You clearly don't love God very much. It's if you express any identity outside of what I deem to be good, I can't trust you. And that's the shadow message. And we can say, well, no, you can read, that's this intent and impact thing again. Well, that's not what they mean. It's just right. But whether or not it's what they mean, it's absolutely what has happened to basically anyone you talk to for more than 10 seconds about being raised in the church. If you express identity, if you express difference opinions, you find yourself on a disciplinary council. And that's a real problem. And that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
This is nothing really to do with the comment except for like the whole like fuck the man part. Since I've left the church, I don't know about anybody else, but whenever I'm like with my family and they're saying like prayer or something like that, I like always keep my eyes open and I like stand there like this and I don't fold my arms because I like just want to like say fuck the man in my own little way without pissing people off too much, you know?
That is one of my favorite things about being an ex-Mormon now is that when I'm visiting TBM friends, I am never picked on to say a prayer, and that's pretty nice. But also, speaking back to the original comment and question and everything, I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I left all of the dogma, there was, there's a lot to unpack and there's a lot of trauma and there's ups and downs through this whole journey. But one of the biggest things that I've just really, really loved is watching how my true me, my real personality is blossoming. And just, I had no idea how funny I actually was, how expressive I could be, and how I didn't realize how not free I was to just be me until I was out.
That's another thing, like just like hyping yourself up and like saying I did a good job on something, like I actually am like this thing, is so against like what the Mormon church teaches you to do. You're always taught to not give yourself any credit. All the credit goes to like God or Jesus or something like that. Nothing that you do is because of you. And I think it's a really good thing for people to give themselves credit, but it's also looked down on like a lot, especially in society, because you're just viewed as like self-centered or things like that. But coming out of the church is a completely different perspective, and it's a completely different reason the majority of the time for hyping yourself up.
I had talked to Maggie about this again on our that. I wrote a book, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And to this day, to this moment, mentioning it in any context makes me feel like a jackass. Like I was like, so in my book, I'm so sorry. Like just slap me over the face with it, because I was told that bringing yourself, congratulating yourself, being proud of yourself was just straight up wrong. And so like I have this thing that I spent like 10 trillion hours, literal years on. It came out, made bestseller, all these things, and like I'm a marketing guy that doesn't market his own book well because that makes me feel icky. Icky's a real word, by the way. Just throwing that out there.
You would know because you wrote a book, right?
Shut up. Jerk.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like literally anytime I say anything about myself, like, or because I've done particularly well on TikTok, which I never have like on any other platform, and I'm proud of myself for it. Like I think I've done a good job. But anytime I like mention my TikTok or bring it up or like say, hey, look at this thing that I do, I always feel like I'm just shoving it in everyone's face, and like I am just like showing off pretty much.
It's almost like toxic humility that like you have to like over humble yourself to the point that it erases your identity, and anything that's something that's not even necessarily like an accomplishment, you're seen as arrogant for talking about something that makes you unique and special.
I like that term, toxic humility. That's a good one.
I love that. That's great.
I also like the term toxic humility, and it's one of the reasons I let Kirk know when he's wrong.
To keep me toxically humble, or so that you're toxic and I'm humble? There's like a lot of words there that I want to deconstruct.
She just nods her head.
This is why I keep you as a friend, Maggie. Who needs enemies?
All right. Does anybody else have anything else to add or want to make any final points? All right, then. Well, thank you all for joining tonight. This was kind of an experiment. I do plan on doing more of these, and I hope that you will all be involved at some point in more of these. I want to do more like topics than just gender, like dive into a lot of things, because I feel like public discussions and talking about this is very good for the whole community, because one, we can learn from each other, and other people can learn from us. Yes, thank you all for joining in tonight. This has been awesome, and I really appreciate it. And a special thank you to Kirk for doing the whole technical side of this.
It's a light lift for me. I kind of have the facility, so not a problem at all.
All right. Well, I guess we just end this. I don't know how to end things.
Awesome. Well,